I was merely standing in the corner to relieve myself when a group of soldiers seized me and threw me into the death row of the imperial prison. It was all because during that moment I happened to be seen by Princess Qingfeng as she passed by. The emperor flew into a rage and with a single decree cast me into this dungeon. On the day of my scheduled exile to the border, just as I was consumed by despair and ready to embrace death, a voice suddenly echoed in my mind. To my astonishment, I had awakened the slaughter god system. As long as I continued to slay my enemies, I would grow stronger. However, I was currently nothing more than a prisoner awaiting execution. Where could I possibly find enemies to slaughter so that I might level up? Before I could devise a plan, the cell door creaked open, unlocked by the jailer. He escorted a fierce-looking death row inmate who stepped inside with a menacing gait. The moment that prisoner saw me, he made a beeline for my position, and I knew deep down that something was amiss. Just as I attempted to rise and retreat, his hand clamped firmly onto my shoulder. "Are you Su Cheng? You have mistaken me for someone else. Stop playing games. With that wretched appearance of yours, I would recognize you, even if you turned into ashes. To think you dared to harbor designs on Princess Qingfeng. You certainly have guts." My heart shuddered violently. This man knew my background as clearly as the back of his hand. He was undoubtedly sent specifically for me. "Someone has paid to purchase your life. Watch your back in the afterlife." The moment he finished speaking, the man swung the heavy iron chains from his hand, striking down directly toward my forehead. My pupils constricted in shock. If that blow landed, would I not perish on the spot? Driven by the desperate instinct to survive, I narrowly dodged the attack. The chains smashed against the wall, leaving a deep indentation. Throughout the cell, the other death row inmates watched the scene with cold, indifferent eyes. Seeing that I had evaded his strike, the man grew furious and kicked out at me with immense force. I could not dodge in time, and the blow landed squarely in my chest, causing excruciating pain. As the agony radiated through my body and I was pushed into a corner, I resolved to stake everything on a final gamble. While he was still off balance, I lunged forward like a madman, ramming into him with all my might. The man was caught unprepared, and his entire body was sent crashing to the ground. "You want to take my life? Then I shall send you to meet your ancestors." I grabbed the cold iron chain, tightening it with all my strength around his throat. The red-eyed man struggled frantically. No matter how much he thrashed or kicked, I refused to let go. Only one thought remained in my mind: he had to die. I do not know how much time had passed, but the man finally stopped struggling, his breath fading away completely. I panted heavily. The overwhelming relief of having cheated death caused my hands to tremble uncontrollably. Suddenly, a cold mechanical voice echoed within my mind. "Congratulations to the host for eliminating an enemy. Kills confirmed, 1 attribute point." So this was the power of the system. Any being who harbored hostility toward me and was judged as an enemy by the system would grant me attribute points upon being defeated. I hurriedly opened my attribute panel to look at my pitifully meager stats. I did not hesitate for a moment. With the points I had just acquired, I poured them all into my constitution. The following second, a warm current flooded through my entire body. The stamina I had just exhausted was restored in an instant, and I felt even more vibrant and vigorous than before. I looked back at the attribute panel. This is excellent. Killing just one person has already made me stronger. If I were to kill a few more, wouldn't I be able to walk unimpeded through this place? My gaze swept over the other death row prisoners in the cell. All of them shuddered under my stare. None of them dared to meet my eyes, and I could not help but feel a sense of regret. It is a pity that these men hold no killing intent toward me, so they are not counted as enemies. What a waste of this rich source of experience. At this moment, footsteps echoed from the corridor, and I hurriedly wiped the blood from my face. I leaned against the wall, feigning a look of complete indifference. The jailer glanced into the cell, saw the man lying dead on the floor, yet he said nothing and simply ordered people to take the body away. For the next few days, the cell was unnervingly quiet, but I was nearing the brink of madness from hunger. Because my constitution had increased, my appetite had grown proportionally. The 2 corn buns provided each day were merely a drop in the ocean for me. I was so hungry that I nearly collapsed. I even resorted to chewing on straw just to stave off the starvation. Heavens, they won't even grant me a full meal. I am going to die of hunger before my journey even begins. Just as I was looking up at the sky and crying out in frustration, the jailer finally arrived to inform us that it was time to depart. The faces of the other prisoners drained of all color, for being exiled to the border meant facing near certain death. Yet my face was filled with anticipation. Finally, I was to be liberated from this wretched place. Chaos is preferable. The more tumultuous the situation, the more enemies shall present themselves. I can slay them to advance my cultivation and incidentally fill this empty stomach of mine. Over a dozen prisoners were shackled together by a chain as thick as a wrist, and by misfortune, I was positioned at the very front. Behind me trailed a long, weary line of men stumbling with every step. They had long been dizzy from starvation. Every step I took felt like an arduous struggle. Naturally, this hindered the pace of the entire procession. The commander overseeing our transport was a ferocious officer with thick eyebrows and wide eyes. He sat atop his horse, cracking his whip and roaring thunderously. "Why are you crawling at such a snail's pace? Are you raising turtles? If we do not reach the camp by nightfall, I will have your hides." I gritted my teeth and forced myself to pick up the pace, managing to cover over 100 miles in one go. By midday, the convoy finally halted to rest beside a riverbank. The guards gathered together, ravenously tearing into dried meat. The intoxicating aroma wafted directly into my senses. We prisoners could only watch with hollow eyes, struggling to swallow our saliva as we observed the officers eating until grease dripped from their lips. I chose to close my eyes. If the eyes do not see, the heart will not crave. Leaning against a tree to rest, just as I was drifting into a light slumber, a faint vibration rippled through the earth. My eyes snapped open, and before I could steady my senses, the frantic sound of galloping hooves was already upon us. 5 men on swift steeds, clad in soft armor and radiating killing intent, charged toward the edge of the forest. The leader possessed a tiger-like beard, his eyes brimming with murderous aura. He pointed his saber toward us and demanded, "Which one of you is Su Chang? Step forward and meet your end." A shock rippled through me. It seemed some were truly eager to embrace death. Before I could speak, the square-faced man who shared my cell scrambled out from the crowd and pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "It is him. I heard that name mentioned while we were in the dungeon." I stared fixedly at the square-faced man, silently carving this grudge into my heart. Jushong chuckled maliciously, stepping toward me with each stride. "So, you are the coward. Since that is the case, I shall send you on your way myself." As the words left his lips, the great blade in Jushong, I was chained alongside the others with no means of escape, leaving me no choice but to brace for impact by raising my shackled wrists. A crisp metallic clang rang out. My wrists remained unbroken, yet the chains binding them had been severed. Both of us were stunned for a fleeting moment, but my reflexes proved sharper than his. While he remained caught in his stupor, I snatched the large blade from his grasp and countered with a horizontal slash. The villain was dispatched instantly. This scene left everyone present gaping in disbelief. Who could have expected that just a moment ago, I was but a docile lamb? In the blink of an eye, I had launched a counter-offensive and struck down the leader of the assassins. At that instant, a notification from the system echoed in my mind. Ding, enemy slain. Attribute points gained. Without a second of hesitation, I allocated all my newfound points into my physique. The following moment, a wave of warmth surged throughout my body, and the exhaustion accumulated over days of travel vanished instantly. Feeling as though I possessed boundless strength, I turned my gaze toward the remaining 4 assassins. Now in my eyes they posed no threat whatsoever. They were nothing more than walking experience points. It seemed they were not deterred by the death of their leader. The next moment they let out strange cries and surged toward me. I roared and charged, taking on all 4 of them alone. Far from being at a disadvantage, I grew more fierce with every strike, filling the 4 assassins with terror, causing their arms to tremble. "Have you forgotten to eat? You expect to kill me with this pathetic display of strength?" I taunted them while relentlessly hacking away with my blade. One of them, paralyzed by fear, exposed a fatal opening. I seized the opportunity immediately. With a single strike, I sent him collapsing to the ground, barely clinging to life. The system notification confirmed he was not yet fully dead. Just as I prepared to deliver the finishing blow, a squad of soldiers suddenly emerged from the brush behind me. Leading them was the stern-looking officer with thick eyebrows. Which bandits dared to act so brazenly? The sudden arrival of government forces caused the expressions of the 3 remaining assassins to shift as they turned and fled deep into the woods. I cursed inwardly, blaming the soldiers for arriving at the worst possible time and scaring away my attribute points. I turned my attention to the man on the ground and, with one final strike, pierced his heart. He intended to kill me. If he did not die, then I would. What other reason could there be? Who are they? Officer, I am just as confused as you are. Perhaps we should go down and ask them ourselves. The officer with the square jaw stared deep into my eyes, yet in the end he asked nothing further, only ordering his men to replace my shackles. In truth, he had observed the entire process from the shadows, and perhaps he wondered how could a prisoner starved for days like me possess the strength to slay a trained assassin. By nightfall, we were confined to the temporary holding cell of the post station. Everyone else was exhausted and slumped over, yet I remained alert and full of vigor. The others instinctively crawled away from me, especially the square-jawed man who had pointed his finger at me earlier, terrified of retaliation, so fearful that he dared not lift his head. The post station attendant brought in corn cakes. The group scrambled to seize them, but the square-jawed man dared not move. I stared fixedly at him, and he knew he had caught my attention. "Big brother, you have put all the cakes away." Driven by the attendant's urging, the square-jawed man could endure the hunger no longer. As he prepared to stand up to retrieve a cake, I rose as well. His face was filled with dread. You do not go too far? Too far? When you betrayed me, did you not think of going too far?" I raised my shackles and brought them down heavily toward him. The square-jawed man shrieked in agony, begging the attendant for help. Yet the attendant did not even glance back. He simply turned and walked away. The square-jawed man fell into immediate despair. The fear in his eyes slowly shifted into a crazed desperation. He realized that death was inevitable either way, so he decided to stake everything on one final gamble. Yet, the moment he lunged forward, he was sent flying by a single blow from me. Ding. Number of kills, 1. Attribute points rewarded, 0. 3 available. Attribute points. The night passed without incident. The next morning, the attendant arrived to distribute the food on time. Strangely, this time, not a single person dared to touch any of it. Every prisoner watched me with wide, hollow eyes. The man who had been beaten the day before hunched his back and approached me with a fawning, flattering expression. "Big brother, please, you first." I stood stunned, then let out a cold laugh. "Are you lot not eating?" "If you have not eaten, we would not dare touch the food, even if we had the courage to do so." I did not stand on ceremony with them either. I pulled out 2 corn cakes and devoured them ravenously. Just then, the thick-browed guard came to patrol. With a single glance, he spotted the square-faced man lying on the ground. When did he perish? Who did this? No one in the cell dared to answer. Only the sound of me chewing on my corn cake could be heard. The thick-browed guard stomped over to stand before me. Looking down from on high, he demanded, "How did he die?" "Officer, I was sleeping like the dead. I know nothing at all." "Then how do you to explain the blood on your shackles?" I raised my hands to inspect them. Sure enough, there were dried bloodstains on the iron, even though these chains had only been replaced yesterday. For a fleeting moment, I could not explain the origin of the blood. How truly strange. Why would there be blood on my shackles? Could it be that you replaced them with old ones for me? He glared at me. "Confess the truth." "Confess what?" "Every prisoner here is living with their head on the edge of a blade. Dying on the road is nothing unusual. Who knows, perhaps one day even I will meet my end. Is that not right, officer?" The thick-browed guard stared at me intently, as if trying to extract the truth from my very expression. Finally, he let out a cold huff and without another word turned and walked away. The troop continued their journey toward the frontier. lacking the reinforcement of the attribute from yesterday, and with not a drop of sustenance in my stomach. I found my steps growing significantly heavier. Every time I slowed my pace, the entire group was forced to slow down as well. The thick-browed guards move faster. Where has all that aggression from yesterday gone? I curled my lip in silence. Suppressing the rage within my heart, I quickened my pace. Truly, when one is forced to bow under low eaves, one must yield. When the sun reached its zenith, the escort party halted by a small stream to rest. The prisoners collapsed onto the ground, utterly spent. Just as I sat down to massage my aching legs, the scarred officer threw a water bucket into my lap. Go fetch some water. Everyone was parched. With these bindings so tight, how can I perform such labor? Untie him. The scarred officer commanded. The soldiers immediately stepped forward to remove my chains. However, he deliberately ordered 2 men to watch me closely. Do not let him try any tricks. I carried the bucket toward the riverbank. As I returned with the water, the starving prisoners lunged forward like a pack of wolves. Before I could even catch my breath, the scarred officer blocked my path again, ordering me to go into the stream and catch some fish. Do you not see that your brothers are starving? I will not go. Such a trivial task is something you should do yourself. You dare to defy me? The atmosphere instantly froze to a breaking point. The scarred officer's hand rested heavily upon the hilt of his blade. I did not back down. I glared back at him, then waded into the water to catch fish. Once finished, must I also build a fire and feed you by hand? Sir, these are prisoners awaiting execution, not your personal servants. I nearly met my end just now. The old man who shared my cell suddenly crawled toward us. My lord, I know how to catch fish. Allow me to accompany him. Go then. On the way to the stream, the hunchback approached me with a sly grin. Just watch me in a moment, he said. Why help me? I still admire you as a true man of honor, that is all. The road ahead is treacherous. We must look out for one another. Thinking back, in my hometown, I was once known as a legend. People called me the White Streak in the Waves. My Sir Zhang and I am called Chiyu. Very well, I never expected this old man to possess such hidden skills. Even while shackled, he could dive into the water and move with total freedom. In no time at all, he had caught several large fish. When we reached the shore, the bushy-browed officer glanced at the fish on the ground. Without even lifting his eyelids, he demanded they be roasted until cooked. Do it, for I will not repeat myself a second time. I am not truly intent on slaying you today. Just as I was about to lose my temper, the hunchback stepped in to mediate. Your Excellency, I know how to roast them. I shall prepare them to your satisfaction. The bushy-browed officer cast a cold glance at me, tossed a small bag of salt to the hunchback, and turned to leave. I sat down heavily on the ground, thinking to myself that this debt would one day be repaid. As the hunchback skillfully prepared and roasted the fish, he gently advised, Big brother, do not take it to heart. An arm cannot twist against a thigh, endure it for now and the storm shall pass. But why were you called the White Streak in the Waves? Wouldn't it be better to be named the Patient Black Tortoise instead? That name is not bad either. I was at a loss for words. It is the first time I have seen someone willing to be called a tortoise. The hunchback worked nimbly, roasting the fish and presenting them on a platter to the guards. Once finished, he slipped back to secretly hand me half a corn cake. I brought this along when we left early this morning. Let us share it. What is your motive? I hope for your protection, big brother. I wish to survive until we reach the border to slay a few more from the northern desolation. Who knows, I might even earn the rank of a general. You are insane. You becoming a general? Indeed, it was merely a pipe dream. Yet I would not be the one to extinguish his hopes. In this desolate hellscape, holding on to a shred of hope is the only way to endure the grueling days ahead. By day, we were driven to exhaustion. By night, we were at the beck and call of the soldiers, ordered to do this and that. My eyes turned bloodshot from fatigue, surviving only on the meager buns the old hunchback would secretly smuggle to me. I had accumulated a stash of attribute points, yet I dared not use them. They remained my only trump card. Suddenly, the bushy-browed soldier summoned me to his quarters, where a plate of steamed meat sat upon the table, releasing a fragrance that grew increasingly intoxicating. He took a bite before me, then tossed the remainder onto the floor as if feeding a dog. Indeed, I was cruel, but I was not devoid of reason. You stubborn wretch, who are you trying to act tough for? If you dare to cause trouble again, I have 1,000 ways to deal with you. Why had a new group of prisoners been brought to our quarters? The already cramped cell was now packed with over a dozen more men. I was drained to the bone. Just as I sat down, the old hunchback scurried over holding 2 corn buns for me. I reached out to accept them, but a filthy hand snatched them away. The culprit was a one-eyed man who had previously terrorized the others. He devoured both buns without hesitation. After finishing, he turned toward me with a face full of provocation. The taste is quite acceptable. Consider this your lesson in showing respect to your elders. Old hunchback tried to protest, but the man kicked him away effortlessly. I had endured the bullying of the soldiers. But for a fellow prisoner to dare trample upon my head? What are you looking at? This old man has dozens of lives on his hands. Do you think I am afraid of you? So, a killer thinks he is quite powerful, does he? The one-eyed man was incensed. His fist flew toward my face, yet I neither dodged nor retreated. I met his incoming strike with a punch of my own. A crisp sound of snapping bone echoed throughout the prison cell. The one-eyed, his entire arm was rendered useless. That very arm had claimed dozens of lives. The one-eyed man suddenly drew a sharp iron blade and struck. I tilted my body to evade the blow. With a single hand blade strike, I hacked into his forearm. A crisp snapping sound echoed, the arm broke clean off, and the one-eyed man fell to the ground, scrambling back in terror, the arrogance in his eyes having completely vanished. I stepped toward him, fixing my cold, predatory gaze upon him. This was the man who had dozens of lives on his hands. His bones were certainly tough. One-eyed man, both of your arms are now crippled. The agonizing pain caused his entire face to contort in torment. With an expressionless face, I picked up a small shard of iron. I weighed it in my hand, my eyes sweeping over his body as if deciding where to strike next. The one-eyed man collapsed into despair. Big brother, I was just boasting. I am not a killer. Those dozens of deaths were all lies. It is the truth. I was originally a butcher's apprentice, but I accidentally killed my master, which is how I ended up here. I truly do not have the heart to kill anyone. Whether it was intentional or not, I have my own ways of finding out. Please, sir, tell me what I must do for you to spare me. It is simple. Descend to the underworld and ask your master yourself. The one-eyed man jolted in shock before letting out a roar. You are playing with me. I will haunt you even as a ghost. With one fluid motion, I pierced his heart. The prison cell sank back into silence. Everyone looked at me, their eyes filled with the fear one reserves for a madman. Only old Yu looked on with a complex expression. He had never seen me act with such brutality before. I crouched in the corner, appearing perfectly indifferent. Are you finding my methods too severe? Big brother, killing him saved us from 100 future troubles. From now on, no one will dare to provoke us again. No, I simply wanted to slaughter him. I did not think that far ahead. Brother Q went silent. Only knew that I had spoken the truth. The suppressed rage had been bottled up for too long. Finally, it found its release. I glanced at the attribute board. Physical constitution, talent, and the remaining attribute points waiting to be distributed. Though the points were few, the stifling frustration within my heart was finally vented. Early the next morning, the thick-browed officer arrived at the cell to conduct his patrol. The moment he stepped inside, he saw the one-eyed man lying dead, his body stiff. His expression darkened, yet he said nothing. He did not even offer breakfast. He ordered everyone to depart immediately. The entire group marched in silence. Not a single person dared to stir up trouble at a time like this. Although my stomach was empty, thanks to the system's support, my pace did not slow down in the slightest. The group stopped to rest at a small hill where several wild pear trees were laden with fruit. Though not fully ripe, the fresh, fragrant scent made everyone crave them. They certainly looked thirst-quenching, did they not? One reckless prisoner asked for permission to climb up and pick them. The thick-browed officer was unexpected. This time, that king of hell actually nodded in agreement. Upon receiving permission, the prisoners scrambled frantically up the hill. They stuffed their mouths until they were overflowing. In no time, everyone except for myself and the old hunchback had ascended the hill. This made the old man anxious. Big brother, look at those wretches. They eat half and throw away the rest. It is a waste of heaven's gifts. If you want them, just go. You thieving dog, let go of my pear. On the hill, only I remained, along with the thick-browed officer. Our eyes met, and the atmosphere seemed to freeze solid. Eventually, he stood up and began to walk toward me. You were the one who killed him last night, were you not? Are you trying to put on an act for me, claiming he stole my food? I would not dare. So you were born with a penchant for killing. That is correct. Since you enjoy killing so much, I shall ensure you survive until we reach the frontier, so you may kill to your heart's content. Explain yourself clearly. Huyang Camp is the place where you will be buried. What kind of place is Huyang Camp? Just as I was desperately trying to recall the memories regarding Huyang Camp, he struck the blood whistle toward us. Shortly after, the soldiers and prisoners on the hill began to descend. Once everyone had gathered, officer gave the cold order for the exiled group to continue their march. The prisoners, having eaten their fill of wild pears, seemed to walk with lighter steps. Old Vu, while walking cautiously, edged closer to me. Big brother, I apologize for not being able to secure any pears for you. It was all in vain. Have you ever heard of Huyang Camp? Big brother, why do you ask about that place? It is the Yama's palace for the condemned. No one who enters that place ever returns. How do you know? I am one who escaped from the northern desolation after all. The commander there is named Shangshan Hu. He uses prisoners as human shields. It has the highest mortality rate, but it also claims the most lives of the northern desolation enemies. In short, that commander is a madman. Old Vu's face turned pale. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he said, I pray we are not assigned there. Upon hearing this, I let out a laugh. That actually sounds rather appealing. It suits me perfectly. I am telling the truth. In that place, one can kill openly, and even better, one is killing the people of the northern desolation. Old Vu looked at me as if I were a lunatic, but seeing the fervor in my eyes, he fell silent. Indeed, for one who delights in slaughter as he does, it is paradise. The officer riding his horse looked down at me with cold eyes. The corner of his mouth curled into a chilling sneer. Wait until you enter Huyang Camp. You will find the time to weep soon enough. 1 month later, the troop arrived at the northern frontier. A frigid wind carrying the stench of blood rushed into our faces. That is the scent of a battlefield. The further north we traveled, the more corpses we encountered. There were imperial soldiers, northern desolation barbarians, and those wearing the garbs of the condemned. Most had already been decapitated. The prisoners dared not lift their heads, fearing they were looking at their own futures. Even Old Vu became reticent. A few days later, before a military camp, the officer unchained him. I patted his shoulder, and he slumped forward without turning back, walking heavily toward the encampment. That receding shadow felt like a final farewell. The remaining men followed me toward the Huwei barracks. With only a few men left in the detachment, the thick-browed officer pointed his whip in a single direction. The other death row prisoners looked at me and sneered, as if I were already a dead man. I walked forward, my expression devoid of emotion. Along the way, the thick-browed officer threw a bundle toward me. I opened it to find salted beef, meant for me to consume in the next life. I let out a cold laugh and tossed it back without changing my expression. The officer caught the beef, the murderous intent in his eyes deepening. He has some backbone. This is the final trial. If I had eaten it, I might have entered the barracks as a normal recruit. But since I refused, the only path left leads to the Huwei barracks to face my death. That is exactly what I desire. I am that man. The thick-browed officer bound my hands and feet tightly before going to sleep himself. In the middle of the night, the dense thunder of hooves awakened me. Since my physical constitution doubled, my senses have become sharper than those of a nocturnal beast. Do not move. It is the Beihuang cavalry. Untie me, or we all die. Impossible, the chains will be exposed. The thick-browed officer hurriedly pinned me down. We both lay motionless in the brush, not daring to draw a full breath. The sound of hoofbeats drew closer, shaking the earth, and I grew anxious. As we struggled, the sound of the hooves began to fade. I let out a sigh of relief. Now can you untie me? They have all left. What are you still laughing about? What if they turn back? Keep your cursed mouth shut. Before the words left his lips, a shout rang out. Ha, who is hiding over there? The thick-browed officer's face turned ghastly pale. I, too, stopped my cursing. Damn you, these barbarians never truly left. Are you going to keep laughing, or have you decided to die together? The thick-browed officer gritted his teeth and pulled out the key. As soon as the chains were unlocked, the shadows returned. Under the moonlight, I could clearly see their massive frames standing like towers of iron. Old Hu was not wrong. These men from the northern wasteland are as sturdy as bulls. Standing before the northern wastelanders, I felt as small as a chicken. I swallowed hard. I thought to myself that I was certainly doomed this time. The curved blades of the northern wastelanders reflected a cold, lethal light. In that moment, I saw three men, three figures as imposing as towers, their muscles rippling like granite. They had not yet discovered me. Just as I was calculating my escape, that madman of an officer suddenly drew his blade and charged. Why are you just standing there? I cursed under my breath, but I had no choice but to follow. Damn you. The officer's heavy blade collided with the curved steel of his opponent. I lunged forward like an arrow released from a bow. He was jolted by the impact, leaving his back exposed to the northern wastelander. The disparity in their strength was overwhelming. Quick, add points, add points. Reason for failure. The host is too single. Ancestor, your host is about to die. If I perish, no one will ever find a wife for the system again. Points added successfully. On the other side, two northern wastelanders swung their blades toward me, their power surging through their bodies. I tightened my grip on the chain, and rather than retreating, I advanced. I threw a punch directly at the curved blade. The two northern wastelanders were forced back 3 steps while I stood firm as a mountain. The thick-browed officer stared in stunned silence, his technique falling into chaos. How can a Central Plains person possess such immense strength? Go ask the king of hell in the underworld. I am in no mood to waste words on bandits who have fallen victim to other bandits. The chaotic melee ensued. Although I possessed raw strength, the lack of a suitable weapon meant I could not swiftly subdue them. The thick-browed officer standing nearby roared out. Finish this quickly, do not let it drag on. Hand me your blade. Catch. The heavy saber whistled through the air as it was tossed toward me. I snatched it from the air, spun around, and delivered a downward slash that snapped the enemy's blade in two. The northern wasteland warrior's face contorted in terror. Before he could react, I had already severed his head with a single strike. System notif: 1 kill recorded, attribute points awarded. The remaining northern wasteland warrior charged forward with bloodshot eyes, and driven by my own killing intent, I struck him down, cleaving both man and blade in two. The thick-browed officer stood agape, thinking to himself, is this even a fight? It was nothing short of a brutal slaughter. The final northern wasteland warrior realized the situation had turned dire and fled. He whistled sharply, and a black stallion surged forward, ready for him to gallop away. Damn it, he's going to summon reinforcements. You think you can escape without my permission? Realizing I could not outrun the horse, I stopped, channeled all my strength, and hurled the heavy saber in my hand. The long saber pierced through his back. Fresh blood sprayed into the air, yet he did not fall, remaining slumped over the horse's back as it vanished into the night. The thick-browed officer fumed with rage, cursing that the enemy had managed to escape. The system chimed with another kill count, but I simply brushed off my hands, calm and composed. That which is marked for death shall perish regardless. It is 90% certain. We traveled through the night, and by the next morning, we finally encountered a patrol of Imperial cavalry. They directed us toward the Huidoan camp. Those cavalrymen stared at me with strange expressions, as if they were looking at a corpse that had crawled over the hill. Arriving at the Haiduan camp, I had barely reached the entrance. The stench of blood was so thick it nearly made me retch. The gate's crossbeam was adorned with rows of hanging northern wasteland skulls. Some had already begun to rot, and crows were busy picking at the scraps of flesh. I swallowed hard, thinking that this mountain tiger camp certainly had a unique sense of decor. The thick-browed officer gave a cold laugh. What? Are you afraid? It is too late now, he sneered. Afraid of what, exactly? The 2 guards at the gate blocked my path upon hearing that I was a death row prisoner. Another one throwing himself forward to serve as a meat shield. I wonder how many strikes a body like that can withstand. Forget it, the previous batch is already dead. Get inside the barracks. Miserable screams echoed throughout the area. The prisoners were bound to stakes, their flesh flayed and torn apart. Stop, stand still, and do not cause trouble. The officer led me to a dark and damp chamber. After speaking, he shoved me inside and locked the door. The room was pitch black. I tripped the moment I stepped inside. I looked down and realized it was a stiff, lifeless corpse. So that is why the previous messenger never delivered the letter. He had died right here. The officer returned, cursing under his breath as he dragged the corpse away. The cell plunged back into darkness. I leaned against the corner of the wall, thinking that this place truly lived up to its grim reputation. Even the prison cell came with a pre-supplied corpse. Exhausted, I drifted into a hazy sleep. In my slumber, I suddenly heard the cell door creak open and the officer appeared at the threshold. Do you regret it? I rubbed my eyes. I did not understand why he would suddenly ask such a question. Regret what? Ah, never mind. He nodded without saying another word. He turned around, preparing to leave. Wait. Throughout this entire journey, why did you not kill me? Why should I kill you? Is there not someone who wishes to take my life? Do you wish to know who it is? Listen closely. The dead have no need to know. Surely that cannot be it. You are on the verge of death. Do you take me for a transparent corpse? Furthermore, stop trying to tempt me with salted beef. I do not eat beef. Or perhaps I still owe you a blade. I shall return a better one to you next time. The prison guard's footsteps marched on without pause. A faint, subtle smile tugged at the corner of his lips. As I stepped out of the prison cell, I opened the system interface while alone. This truly is a land for leveling up, to have accumulated this much in only a few days. The remaining attribute points total 1.7. I waited until nightfall when several men, covered in blood, entered without so much as a glance at me and each found a place to sit. Finally, a withered old man appeared, carrying a lantern, his clothes remarkably clean. Oh, we have a newcomer with such soft skin and tender flesh. What crime did you commit? The old man smiled craftily and sat beside me, ignoring the past. My name is Tuthon, but here we do not use names, we use aliases. You may call me Lean Wolf. I chuckled softly. Then you may call me Foolish S. Foolish S, that is interesting. Where is everyone going? Why are these people covered in blood? They are going to mow the meadow. Mow the meadow? Here, killing people in the northern wasteland is referred to as mowing the meadow. I nodded. So, it is nothing more than that. At this moment, the guard brought in a large basket of steamed buns and a barrel of wine. Lean Wolf said, "You are a newcomer, so help yourself freely today. Hereafter, you will queue according to your kill count. Those who fail to kill anyone shall not be permitted to eat. This rule suits me well. Strength is paramount." I took 5 meat buns, while behind me a man as sturdy as a tower took 10, downing half a barrel of wine in one go. Next was a woman with a voluptuous figure and a vivid red flower blooming upon her face. She took 2 buns, cast a look of disdain at the wine barrel, and walked away. "Thin Wolf," she called out, "tell your little butterfly to eat more, will you? Otherwise, she will suffer from malnutrition." From the shadows a shrill curse echoed out. A pale, delicate-looking young man emerged. He twirled an orchid, barely lifting a single bun with his fingers. I felt goosebumps rise on my skin and decided to keep my distance from such an effeminate fellow. Finally, there was a child with a hair lip, draped in a black cloak. He dove headfirst into the basket, devouring the food voraciously, while Thin Wolf explained, "Do not be afraid, he is a good child. It is just that he has a rather ravenous appetite." I swallowed my bite of bun. Indeed, this was a gathering of formidable characters, none of them ordinary. Thin Wolf began his introductions while drinking his wine. That giant, he gestured, was once the young master of a Jongnon gang. His entire faction was wiped out, while Butterfly escaped from a pleasure house. When she kills, the flower on her face blooms as brilliantly as a fluttering butterfly. As for the one who twirls the orchid, he is a relative of a prince. Because he bewitched the prince's daughter, he was sent here. The orchid twirler protested, "It was she who bewitched me." "Is that so?" He shrieked in protest. "His kidneys are weak." To have weak kidneys in a place like this, he truly is a talent of his own kind. Which child is the most wretched? His master was an evil cultivator who forged him into this monstrous state. He killed his master, but unable to escape, he remained here. As for me, I am merely an old man who plays with poisons. Butterfly laughed coldly, saying, "If this old poison master calls himself normal, it is enough to make one die of laughter." The orc, fearing that I might be poisoned. I was startled. It turned out the expert right beside me was the one called Skinny Wolf, chuckling to himself. "Do not listen to their nonsense. You likely entered because Princess Ching Feng took a fancy to my treasure, did she not?" Skinny Wolf spat out a mouthful of wine. The figure known as Butterfly laughed from within the shadows. Skinny Wolf nodded in agreement. "If that is the case, then you have truly been wronged. The one who is truly wronged and suffering is me. Tell me, what kind of skills do you possess?" "I enjoy killing. From now on, leave the killing to me." "Very well, I shall grant your request." The night passed without incident. The following morning, the soldiers brought over a basket of steamed buns. Everyone lined up according to the rules, and I consciously took my place at the back. Skinny Wolf handed me 5 buns. "Kid, I saved these for you." "Huh?" I looked at the boy's basket in surprise. He nodded. As we were eating, the door opened. Everyone hastily swallowed their buns and followed. A man with a goatee entered. Everyone hastily swallowed their buns and followed. The man with the goatee led us to a barracks filled with weaponry. He handed Skinny Wolf a booklet containing several pages. "Is everything all right? The northern region has been unstable these past few days. Investigate the map. What are they planning to do? A bounty of 1 merit point for capturing one alive. 2 merit points, Skinny Wolf. Take this newcomer along with you." The man with the goatee left after finishing his instructions. I was dazed. "Skinny Wolf, what kind of secret jargon are you all using?" Lean Wolf chuckled, saying we would know soon enough. Everyone finished their preparations and readied themselves for departure. No sooner had Lean Wolf finished speaking than everyone began to move. The burly man picked up a mace, its spiked head as large as a person, and hoisted it onto his shoulder. I watched, stunned. That mace must weigh several hundred caddies, must it not? Old Bai, despite his frail appearance, picked up a pitch-black iron rod. The way he stroked it gave me goosebumps. Hu Di took a long whip covered in backward-facing barbs. I shook my head, thinking that it was no surprise she hailed from a pleasure house. Even her weapons were exquisite. Only the young boy remained. He walked to the weapon rack, embraced a box, and made his way to Lean Wolf's side. I pointed at the box and asked, "Is that your weapon? What is inside it?" Lean Wolf laughed from behind me. "Ha, that box belongs to this old man. It is filled with interesting trinkets. As for the boy, he has no need for weapons." The boy raised his hand and flicked his fingers, his razor-sharp nails glinting as if to tell me, "Those are my weapons." I nodded. Then, looking around, I began to select my own weapon. My gaze was immediately drawn to a large saber. I picked up the saber and examined it closely, my suspicions growing stronger. How could there be 2 blades so identical in this world? "Do you fancy it?" "It was placed on the rack only yesterday. It suits you well." "Where did this saber come from?" "Who knows? He picked it up yesterday," Lean Wolf said, pointing to the boy. I understood. It seemed highly likely that this was the saber belonging to the thick-browed officer. Little did I expect it would find its way back into my hands. Such is the mysterious nature of fate. I hoisted the saber onto my shoulder, and the others finished their selections as well. With everyone armed, we stepped out of the command tent together. Outside the tent, a bald man stood on the open ground. Behind him stood a squadron of guards, standing in perfect formation, their killing intent soaring to the heavens. Upon seeing us emerge, the bald man turned back and waved his hand. Depart. The bald man leaped onto his horse, taking the lead of the formation. Skinny Wolf led a few men to follow the bald-headed man. As Hu Yujun trailed behind them, I fixed my gaze upon the bald man and softly Skinny Wolf, why is there a monk in the military camp? The moment I finished speaking, a sudden burst of killing intent surged from the bald man, yet accompanied by Skinny Wolf's low chuckle. That murderous aura vanished without a trace in an instant. Do not speak nonsense, he was born that way and has no connection to the Buddha whatsoever. I nodded, refraining from asking any further questions. Nevertheless, whether by intent or mere habit, my gaze kept drifting toward that bald head. Until the sun pierced through the morning mist, I was forced to narrow my eyes. The light reflecting off that bald head was far too blinding. At this moment, the bald man came to a halt, dismounted his horse, and stepped before Skinny Wolf. Yesterday, 3 Beihuang scouts were discovered here. It is unknown from which direction they arrived. By the time we reached this location, they were already dead. 2 of them perished right here. Their skulls had been split open. Skinny Wolf nodded. The bald man promptly vaulted onto his horse and continued the journey. The penal battalion marched for another half a day. This time, the bald man stopped beside a small pool of water. He did not approach the water but pointed his whip at it, stating that 3 scouts had once watered their horses here. Afterward, they fled toward the east. Our men lost their trail. They crossed a marshland and suddenly increased their speed. Our men could not keep pace. Skinny Wolf nodded again and said, "You wait here, let us go investigate." The bald man nodded in agreement. Skinny Wolf immediately led me and the others away from the main group. By the time I looked back, the bald man was nowhere to be seen. I then asked them, "Are you not afraid that we might flee?" The others did not bother to answer my question, as if it were a foolish inquiry. Only Skinny Wolf chuckled and replied, "You wish to run? Where could you possibly go? Does the Empire have need of you, or does Beihuang have need of you?" I felt if I were to flee, I would become a wanted fugitive within the Empire and a pariah in the northern wastelands. I gazed up at the vast pale sky, a heavy gloom settling in my heart. The world is so expansive, yet there is nowhere for me to go. If you wish to escape, you may leave this instant. We shall report upon our return that you have perished. However, if you are captured by them, we shall all perish together. I let out a sharp laugh. You truly underestimate me. I came here to kill, and until I have sated my bloodlust, I am going nowhere. The man called Soy gave a satisfied nod and said, "There are 2 guards ahead. You and Shen Yaoyao go eliminate them." The cold-faced man rolled his eyes, seemingly resigned to the nickname Shen Yaoyao. I looked left and right, filled with doubt. Where are the guards? Why do I see nothing? I do not see them either. I heard it speak. The thin man said, pointing toward the youth beside him. I asked curiously, when did it speak? Why did I not hear anything? It spoke when you were laughing earlier. He pointed toward the front and held up 2 fingers. I was so astonished my jaw nearly hit the ground. Heavens, such a thing is actually possible? On the battlefield, one must be observant. You must not only watch for the enemy but also coordinate with your comrades. These are things you should learn to do first. I crept forward together with Shen Yaoyao. Sure enough, it was not long before we spotted 2 horses grazing ahead. The horses of the northern wastelanders have neither saddles nor bridles. At a glance, they appear to be wild horses, but their masters are usually nearby. Fearing that I might fail to spot the northern wastelanders, Shen Yaoyao went so far as to point out a small pit beside the thorn bushes, signaling that the northern wastelanders were hiding there. I nodded to Shen Yaoyao, and together we flanked the pit from both sides. While escorting the northern wastelanders, I covertly added points to my attributes. Attribute allocation successful. Remaining attribute points. 1. A wave of warmth instantly flooded my entire body. This is a sensation that no ordinary food could ever provide. I licked my lips, tightened my grip on the blade, and charged forward. In the distance, Weakling was slowly approaching the pit, but he suddenly jolted in surprise. Was he not supposed to sneak up on them? Why was this fellow rushing in headlong? Weakling intended to retreat immediately. As the plan changed, he decisively abandoned his comrade. The main performers were observing both me and Weakling. Their expressions remained completely indifferent. The gaunt wolf continued to chuckle. The large man and the young boy paid no attention at all. Of the group ahead, only Hu Dai was muttering softly to herself. He looks average enough, I suppose. It is a pity that he is so reckless. The gaunt wolf chuckled again. Do not be so quick to judge. Wait a moment and see for yourself. The situation on the battlefield can shift in the blink of an eye. Weakling was hurriedly retreating, while I was rushing headlong into the fray. By the time Weakling turned back with his iron staff in hand, he heard a miserable scream echoing from the distance. Weakling began to mourn for me. He had never seen anyone fight in such a manner before. The people of Northern Wasteland are no easy prey. How could someone just charge in blindly like that? However, the moment Weakling reached Hu Dai, he saw her looking ahead with a face full of astonishment. Stop looking, he has surely met a tragic end. What a pity, he had only arrived for a single day. Yet Hu Dai interrupted Weakling. Look over there, that man is truly savage. Weakling turned his head in disbelief, his jaw dropping in shock as he saw me standing beside the small pit covered in blood. Before me lay a Northern Wasteland assassin cleaved into 2 halves. A look of naivety still lingered on the face of the Northern Wasteland warrior. His body slumped to the ground. I wiped the blood from my face as a shadow lunged from behind me. It was another Northern Wasteland warrior. That Northern Wasteland warrior did not charge toward me, but ran straight for the warhorse. But how could I ever let him have his way? I lunged directly toward him, raising my great blade to strike at the man from the Northern Wilderness. As the Northern Wilderness warrior arrived, my great blade met him, borrowing the momentum of my charge. One could see my blade, wreathed in boundless killing intent, descending upon the Northern Wilderness warrior. With a soft, decisive thud, I cleaved the Northern Wilderness warrior in 2, along with his weapon. The system's notifications rang out in rapid succession, marking the kills and the attribute points rewarded. I stood amidst the battlefield like a blood-drenched Rakshasa. The man known as Weak Kidneys gaped, his mouth agape wide enough to fit 3 iron rods. He swallowed hard, a dry gulp, and uttered 3 words, truly formidable. The laughing wolf chuckled, saying, I told you not to draw conclusions so early. Butterfly spoke with a complex look in her eyes. Indeed, we underestimated him. This strength is on par with the big guy's capabilities. Laughing Wolf shook his head. It is not the same. The big guy's wolf-tooth mace weighs several hundred caddies. He does not slay his enemies through raw strength alone. The big guy rarely spoke, but he finally broke his silence. It is indeed strong. If it were me, they would have been pounded into mincemeat. As the big guy mentioned mincemeat, the young boy flicked his crimson tongue over his lips, appearing as though he were ravenous. He struggled to finally shut his mouth. I walked back, indifferent to their chatter, and produced a piece of cloth to carefully wipe the blood from my great blade. Laughing Wolf walked over with a smirk. Well done. In the heat of the moment, I forgot to keep a prisoner for questioning. I offered an embarrassed smile. They were merely 2 scouts from the bandit gang after all. Seeing that Laughing Wolf did not blame me, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. However, I noticed the others looking at me with unsettling expressions. Butterfly was tolerable. Her expression remained as cold and detached as before. But Weak Kidneys looked at me with such intensity that I actually felt a flicker of danger. This was a sensation I did not even feel while battling the 2 northern wilderness warriors just moments ago. I met Weak Kidneys' gaze with an inquisitive look, and he immediately smiled. That was truly powerful, to handle them all on your own. I paid him no mind. As for Weak Kidneys abandoning me earlier, it was better that I charged in alone. At least I did not. I laughed and replied, next time I can handle this alone. How could that be? Are we supposed to just let you do everything? It is fine, I enjoy the act of killing. As the 2 of them spoke, Lean Wolf cut the conversation short. Their scout has gone missing, they will realize it soon enough. We must locate their main battalion immediately. Everyone nodded and continued on their journey. This time, they no longer needed to grope blindly in the dark, for if a Beihuang scout had appeared, their main battalion could not be far away. Based on standard experience, Beihuang scouts usually patrol within a few miles of the main battalion, so Han would encounter the main force before long. Sure enough, after about a quarter of an hour, the young boy suddenly raised his hand toward the front right and gave a soft signal. This time there was no need for Lean Wolf to explain. I too realized that the Beihuang were ahead. Their main battalion had finally appeared. Everyone, prepare yourselves. Following Lean Wolf's command, all checked their weapons. The hulking brute gripped his wolf-tooth mace tightly. The sickly one began to stroke his iron staff. Lean Wolf opened the bundle the young boy wore on his back, took out a small red vial and sprinkled the powder inside onto Hu Dai's whip. As for the young boy, who possessed no weapon, he merely sharpened his fingernails. I was certainly the most unremarkable one in the group. I wiped my broadsword clean. Once everyone was prepared, Lean Wolf led us toward the front right. I was feeling rather invigorated. I had earned 1 attribute point after being out for only half a day. My thanks to the Beihuang for their contribution. And soon I would be meeting them once more. Yet, before we could even catch sight of the Beihuang battalion, we heard the roar of battle echoing from the distance. After crossing a small hill, we saw a group of men slaughtering one another in the distance. I looked closely and saw that it was the Imperial Army clashing with the Beihuang. The composition of the Imperial Army was quite chaotic, consisting of both soldiers and common civilians. Among those commoners, I recognized the familiar attire. It was a group of death row prisoners. At this moment, the Imperial Army was forcing these prisoners to charge. Although they lacked weapons or armor, they had no choice but to charge forward, for if they dared to turn back, the executioner's blade would immediately sever their heads. To flee is to choose certain death. To advance remains the only glimmer of hope for survival. Left with no other choice, these death row prisoners had no option but to charge toward the northern barbarians in the distance. The northern barbarians did not hesitate. Mounted on horseback with curved blades drawn, a single charge claimed the lives of more than half the prisoners. The remaining prisoners collapsed in terror. Some knelt on the ground in a daze, staring at the fountain of blood spraying from the headless corpses before them. A heartbeat later, the world spun for one of them, as he too became nothing more than a headless corpse in the eyes of others. Some fled in blind panic, turning toward the Imperial Army's lines only to be met by cold, unforgiving blades. Others scrambled into the grasslands, desperate to escape this slaughterhouse. Yet the northern barbarians gave chase immediately, ruthlessly snuffing out their lives. Before the northern barbarians, the prisoners were no better than straw. In mere moments, nearly all had been decimated. I stood atop the ridge, watching it all in silence. Had I been an ordinary man, I would surely be lying amongst those corpses by now. At this moment, the Imperial soldiers below finally began to stir. With the death row prisoners purged, they finally initiated their own maneuver. Yet, instead of charging toward the northern barbarians, they mounted their horses and fled into the distance. I was taken aback. Are they truly going to let them escape just like that? Was it not supposed to be their turn to charge? For a mere pittance of silver a month, who would risk their life so recklessly? With their expendable human shields wiped out, their natural reaction was to retreat. Now it is our turn. Remember, keep their junior commander alive. A savage roar erupted from a side. I saw the giant swing his massive arm, grabbing the small youth beside him, and hurling him forward with immense force. The youth let out a strange shrill cry midair, landed gracefully, and sprinted toward the northern barbarians on all fours. The giant behind him displayed unnatural valor, covering several meters with every stride. He swung his wolf-tooth mace as if it were as light as the willow-thin man's staff. While I marveled at the sheer absurdity of these two, a piercing laugh suddenly echoed in my ears. I jumped in shock. Turning back, I saw the small flower on Hu Dai's face quietly bloom, transforming in an instant into a butterfly as crimson as blood. Then Hu Dai fluttered after the two men as if she were a true butterfly. At this moment, the willow-thin man edged closer and remarked, Her movement technique is quite impressive, isn't it? I did not reply, letting out a sharp cry before leaping down into the fray. Stunned, the willow-thin man hesitated only for a moment before charging after me. The wolf saint stood atop the hill, unmoving, watching us depart with a mocking grin. Below the hill, the northern desolate warriors were startled by the strange, jarring cries echoing from every direction. Yet upon looking back, they saw only a few figures descending the slope. These few were not even enough to satisfy their appetites, so they dispatched merely a dozen men to deal with us. The rest turned to gather their plundered spoils, but in the next heartbeat their laughter died. Their small detachment was decimated in an instant, and the young boy, acting like a wild beast, lunged at a northern desolate warrior, sinking his teeth directly into the man's throat until blood erupted like a geyser. Despite being drenched in gore, the boy did not falter, instead charging toward another foe. The northern desolate warrior convulsed violently as his life force steadily ebbed away. A massive wolf-tooth mace descended, ending everything. On the hillside, I watched the giant slay a northern desolate warrior. I roared in fury. Yet before I could charge to the foot of the hill, Hody had already begun her assault from the other side. She moved like a literal butterfly, intercepting two northern desolate warriors. While the faces of the northern desolate were contorted with malice, Hody smiled radiantly. Her whip struck the legs of the northern desolate warrior with lethal force, leaving nothing but a trail of blood across his body. Such a wound was naturally insufficient to kill a northern desolate warrior outright. The pain only served to incite their savagery. They opened their mouths wide, intending to seize Hody. However, in the next second they realized their hands had lost all sensation, seeing only crimson trails spreading from the lacerations. The trails spread with terrifying speed, covering the bodies of the northern desolate warriors in a mere heartbeat. The following instant those marks detonated. In a flash, the northern desolate warrior collapsed like a punctured leather ball. All who witnessed the horrific expression of the northern desolate warrior before his death were paralyzed with shock. They scrambled in a frantic attempt to escape Hody's whip. A chain reaction began immediately. Those surrounding Hody collapsed onto the earth. They writhed in agony across the ground. Yet death descended upon them nonetheless. Those surrounding Hody fell to the ground. They rolled in agony, but death claimed them all the same. It was then that I finally arrived at the fray. I raised my great blade, striking directly at the nearest northern desolate warrior. But it was too late. Before my blade could make contact, the warrior had already breathed his last. Hearing no notification, I let out a roar and charged toward the remaining northern wastelanders. By the time I descended, the giant and the youth had already dispatched several of them. One specialized in delivering the finishing blows, while the other provided the lethal follow-up. Their speed was truly remarkable. I finally understood why the giant had been ranked first when we claimed our rations. As for the youth, who stood at the end of the line, it turned out all the easy targets were being saved for him. I was consumed with envy. Yet there was nothing I could do, for the giant and the youth worked with impeccable coordination. I could not intervene even if I wanted to. On the other side, the whip in Hoody's hand moved with blistering speed. Anyone struck by her lash was withered by the wolf's venom, reduced to nothing more than a puddle of putrid blood. By the time my heavy blade arrived, the target was already long dead. I could not secure a single kill. I shouted in frustration, "You have killed them all." Suddenly, I spotted a northern Wastelander in the distance, far enough from the giant and Hoody that he had been spared for the moment. I immediately let out a strange shrill cry. Ha 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 ha. Like a wolf descending upon a sheep, I lunged straight at the northern Wastelander. Just as I excitedly raised my blade to strike the man's head, an iron staff flew from nowhere, striking him squarely in the skull. I stood there, dumbfounded, and traced the trajectory of the staff to find the culprit, only to see the weak-kidneyed one grinning at me. How was that? I told you I wouldn't let you face them alone next time. I spat at the weak-kidneyed one, cursed at him, and lunged toward another northern Wastelander, leaving him behind in his tracks, where he stood scratching his head. Clearly, he had just helped me, so why wouldn't I accept his favor? I had no time to dwell on the weak-kidneyed one. I was maddened with frustration. There was so much experience to be gained on this battlefield, so why had I not managed to claim any for myself? I could not help but mutter inwardly that these people were truly monstrous, leaving not a single opponent for me. Seeing that the northern Wastelanders were nearly wiped out, I felt utterly helpless. I glared at the main force of the northern Wastelanders and charged toward them with a roar, while my companions had already finished collecting their spoils, preparing to withdraw. Their target this time was none other than the Imperial Army's provisions. Because the northern wilderness warriors do not carry rations when campaigning, they rely entirely on pillaging for their sustenance. In the northern border, the only things the northern wilderness forces pillage are the citizens of the empire. Thus, they frequently emerge to wreak havoc. This method not only secures them food supplies, but also serves to harass the imperial populace. Truly, it is a method that serves two purposes at once. The leader of the northern wilderness detachment is named Borgi. This time, leading several dozen men, he seized several carts of grain without breaking a sweat. Bringing the provisions back would mean the successful completion of his mission. Yet, just as he had defeated the imperial escort team, several figures charged down from the mountains. Initially, Borgi did not take them seriously, dispatching only a few men to intercept them while covering the main unit transporting the supplies. However, as soon as he had finished his arrangements, Borgi discovered that nearly all of his subordinates were dead. There was even an imperial citizen charging straight toward his main unit. Borgi was immediately overcome with rage. The imperial dogs have grown quite bold. Borgi kicked his heels into the ground and his warhorse surged directly toward me. He swung his curved blade, intending to end my life in a single strike. I was anxiously seeking experience when I suddenly saw one of the northern wilderness soldiers charging straight toward me. I was overjoyed. Here is experience delivering itself right to my doorstep. I vowed not to let him escape. With that thought, I picked up my pace. Borgi's warhorse drew closer and closer. I raised my heavy blade. He raised his curved blade in response. I let out a crazed laugh. He wore a savage sneer. A sound of impact rang out. Our blades collided with one another. I was prepared to witness his curved blade snap in two. Yet the reality left me disappointed. After this clash, the opponent's curved blade remained completely unscathed. He too was stunned. His blade was a precious weapon bestowed upon him by his tribal chieftain. Never before had a blade of the Empire failed to shatter its target. So why was this time any different? Both warriors shared the exact same thought. The opponent is formidable, his physique is tempered, and his blade is keen. I have always held my enemy in high regard. In the past, a single strike from me could shatter the arm of an ordinary man. Yet that northern barbarian on horseback remained unscathed, and Bayer himself was equally confident in his own strength. Furthermore, he possessed the immense advantage of his warhorse's momentum. This strike should have surely dealt a heavy blow to the Imperial soldier. However, reality proved otherwise. The opponent stood his ground, not retreating a single step, and for a fleeting moment, astonishment flickered in both of their eyes. If the blade cannot break, then I shall strike the man himself, for flesh cannot be as hard as steel. My blade did not deviate, carving a straight path toward his throat. He too sought to leverage the force of my strike to knock me from my mount. Yet upon seeing the cold glint of my blade, he suddenly withdrew his hand and leaned backward. Although I failed to wound him with this strike, I had gained the upper hand in positioning. The previously balanced scales of power began to shift. But this change was short-lived as Bayer reined in his warhorse to face me once more, his momentum restored. I licked my lips. This is a powerful foe. He is unlike any ordinary northern barbarian. If I can slay him, I will surely gain a significant amount of attribute points. The killing intent in his eyes surged as well. It had been a long time since he had encountered a true master of the Empire. If he could eliminate the man standing before him, it would undoubtedly be a heavy blow to the Empire. All that had transpired until now was merely a probe. The true lethal strikes were yet to come. His physique is indeed powerful, but that is not his most lethal technique. His killing move is a relentless chain attack. If the first strike misses, he relies on his formidable physique to deliver a follow-up slash. He calls this move the returning horseblade, and countless Imperial soldiers have perished under it. He is supremely confident in this technique. What I rely on most is not my brute strength, but the system as our current cultivation levels are evenly matched. With him in mind, I invested my points, and a powerful warm current instantly surged through my entire body. Attribute points successfully allocated. My current physique has reached 40, with no points remaining. I kept only 2 points in agility. I poured all the remaining points into my physique. In the very next second, I felt as if that power was immense. It was completed in the blink of an eye. My body has undergone a transformation, returning to its true state. It was as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Yet, I knew that I was fundamentally different from the person I was moments ago. Previously, I was merely twice as strong as an ordinary man, but now I am 5 times stronger. Furthermore, this increase is not a simple matter of multiplication. My overall combat prowess has experienced a profound leap-like growth. This instantaneous change went completely unnoticed by him. At that moment, his mind was occupied solely by his ultimate technique. The others took no notice of me. Each was busy with the slaughter, their eyes only assessing the broader scope of the battlefield. Only one person, in the instant I changed, had sensed it. Perhaps it was the lean wolf standing upon the pile of corpses. No, that could not be. I miscalculated. While the lean wolf was muttering to himself, Boer had already spurred his warhorse to charge toward me. I grinned, accelerating at a speed far beyond before, his pupils constricted. How could the opponent's speed have increased so drastically compared to moments ago? I closed in, nearing his warhorse. Yet he had no time to ponder further. The arrow had already left the string and could not be retrieved. What he needed to do now was to unleash his ultimate technique. He let out a cold laugh, thinking, no matter how strong you are, you cannot evade my ultimate technique. Would I evade? I lunged straight toward him, my speed pushed to its absolute limit. I felt my blood surging, partly from the thrill of battle, but even more so from the sudden evolution of my own power. Is this what true strength feels like? Allow me to savor this feeling. I let out a roar, raised my great blade, and slashed toward him. He felt no fear, raising his own blade to charge at me as well. He had calculated everything. The moment our blades collided would be when he unleashed his lethal art. He had already envisioned the exquisite outcome. His curved blade would circle back and pierce deeply into my spine. That fleeting moment would decide the victor. But would the reality unfold as he desired? When our blades clashed, a shock seized him. Boer felt a violent tremor run through his arm. In the next heartbeat, he watched helplessly as his blade, held firmly in his hand, was severed in two, while the massive recoil shattered the meridians in his arm. Blood sprayed like falling snow. He stared at what was unfolding before his eyes. His mind reeled. How could he possibly comprehend what was happening? Yet it was already too late. His world narrowed until all he could see was my face, twisted into a savage, bearing grin. That final thought had barely taken root in his mind before it was extinguished forever. My great blade, having already shattered his weapon, lost none of its momentum as it descended toward his head. Flesh and bone could not withstand the steel. His head was severed cleanly, leaving his warhorse to carry his body a distance further. His severed head rolled through the grass. I listened to the system's notification, licking my lips in satisfaction. 1 kill, 1 attribute point. Truly, he was a North Desolate captain. The reward points were substantial indeed, so I didn't spare another glance at his corpse on the ground. I turned and charged toward the remaining North Desolate troops. There was still a surge of power coursing through me, waiting to be spent. Every ounce of it was a bounty granted by the system. I had to capitalize on this strength before it faded, to slay as many North Desolate warriors as possible. In the distance, the North Desolate soldiers heard the commotion and began to panic. Their captain had died with eyes wide open, and with him gone, no one had the heart to defend the supply wagons. They scrambled in every direction. I felt a sense of urgency, for I had only managed to slay one. Why were they fleeing so soon? I channeled strength into my legs and launched myself forward. Raising my great blade high, I swung down with precision, striking the back of a fleeing North Desolate soldier. The man couldn't even let out a cry before his soul returned to the eternal heaven. I laughed aloud in my exhilaration. I immediately set my sights on another target. However, the rest of the North Desolate soldiers had already mounted their horses and scattered in retreat. As I cursed their cowardice, frustration burned within me. Suddenly, I spotted a figure hiding near the supply wagons. Ha! A straggler. Without a second thought, I lunged forward, raising my blade to strike his back. The figure seemed to sense the movement behind him. He stumbled in his panic, then turned around in terror. It was an old man with a face etched in deep wrinkled lines. I did not spare him simply because of his age. On the contrary, I exerted my strength to grant him a swift end. The old North Desolate man was paralyzed with fear. The wrinkles on his face contorted as he squeezed his eyes shut to await his fate. In that final perilous moment, a wolf's howl echoed from the distance. Keep him alive, we still need him for the report. I halted my blade in midair. However, the powerful blade aura struck the head of the northern barbarian elder, and with a single agonizing cry, he collapsed to the ground. I did not bother to check the elder's condition. Since I did not hear a notification from the system, I concluded that he was not yet dead. The brute and the others had already finished dealing with the rest. All the remaining northern barbarians were swarming toward me. I truly did not expect this. Suke, you are indeed powerful. The brute was busy picking scraps of flesh off his wolf-tooth mace. The young boy was busy licking his hands. Butterfly said nothing, but her gaze toward me had softened. Only I stared at the unconscious northern barbarian elder on the ground, my face filled with dissatisfaction. It is just an old man. He knows nothing. Better to let me finish him off. Lean Wolf stepped forward and spoke. That is not allowed. He is a shaman of the northern barbarian people. Bringing him back fulfills our mission. A shaman? What on earth is that? Is it something used for sacrifice? Weak Kidney laughed and shook his head. You have never heard of one, let alone know what they are. Enough idle talk. I still shook my head. At this moment, Lean Wolf spoke again, ordering us to take him and regroup with the main battalion. The brute stepped forward, bound the northern barbarian shaman tightly, and hoisted him onto his shoulder. The young boy sat directly on top of the shaman. No one paid any heed to the carnage left behind. We headed back in the direction from which we came. Although my heart was filled with doubts, I did not ask any questions. Before long, we caught sight of the bald-headed man's troops. Seeing us return, the bald-headed man rode his horse. He merely cupped his hands in a gesture of respect toward him. The bald-headed man nodded, waving his hand to command his subordinates. The burly man shifted the sleeping boy to his other shoulder and handed the old mage over to two soldiers. The bald-headed man continued to lead the way while the thin wolf-like man guided us from behind. With the two soldiers escorting the North Wilderness mage, the troop advanced slowly toward the Huiduan garrison. We departed at dawn, and by the time we returned, the sun had already begun to set. The evening glow stretched across the grasslands, bathing them in a brilliant golden hue. I squinted as I glanced back. The bald man's head was still shining brilliantly in the distance. From my side, the voice of the man with the weak kidneys echoed, "How could someone your size possess such immense strength? What kind of cultivation technique do you practice? Or were you born with natural strength like that burly man? You look so frail and withered, yet who would have guessed you are full of muscle? It is truly surprising." The man with the weak kidneys seemed to be having a fit, rambling incessantly in my ear. At first I offered a few replies, but later I simply pretended to be deaf to endure it. This man asked far too many questions. For every one answer you give, he follows up with two more. These endless questions were beginning to drive me mad. Finally, I reached my breaking point. I turned to ask Ho-Deep, "Is he always this talkative?" "He was talkative even before his kidneys became weak," Ho-Deep replied, shaking his head. I was stunned. I could not fathom what Ho-Deep meant. What possible connection could there be between being talkative and having weak kidneys? I turned to ask the thin wolf-like man from a medical perspective. Is there any correlation between excessive talking and kidney deficiency? It depends on who he is speaking to. The thin wolf-like man replied with a wry smile. Once again, I was dumbfounded. I pondered this throughout the journey. How did this conversation somehow end up revolving around me? What does his incessant chatter and his weak kidneys have to do with me? It was not until I saw the Huidoan garrison that I finally understood, and I stood up in realization. Heavens. Stay away from me or I will kill you. I sprinted away from Shen Yao's side as if my life depended on it. Shen Yao did not grow angry, he merely chuckled, a strange grin plastered on his face. Only now did I realize why Shen Yao had been so attentive toward me. As it turns out, he has taken a liking to me. From the moment I first laid eyes on that man, his frail appearance suggested he harbored peculiar inclinations. While I remained vigilant against Shen Yao, the main troop finally entered the Huiyan military camp. The scenery within the camp remained exactly as it was when we departed this morning, save for the now vacant stakes where the Beihuang captives had been held. I glanced up to see blood dripping from the horizontal beam of the Huiyan gate. I curled my lip in disgust. It seemed that everyone here from the top down was far from normal. The bald man had remained silent throughout the journey into the Huiyan camp, and he finally appeared to relax. He had accompanied us on this trip without lifting a finger. Was his only purpose to monitor Lean Wolf and his men? I found his presence truly redundant. The bald man led everyone toward the main tent. Seeing that we had all entered, he let out a sigh of relief and ordered his subordinates to disperse. The soldiers of the Huiyan camp obeyed the command. With a thunderous clamor, they scattered. Lean Wolf ushered us into the tent. Everyone began placing their weapons on the racks, though Shen Yao lingered as he stowed his iron staff, displaying an unsettling sense of attachment. It sickened me. I pondered to myself. Just then, the old man with the goatee walked in from outside, looking as cold as frost. Everyone in the tent turned their gaze toward him. He sat heavily into the chair behind the desk and retrieved a small ledger. The goatee-wearing elder exhaled a breath and slowly asked, "Well, did you capture a high-level mage? Good, you have completed the task." The elder then withdrew the same small ledger from beneath the desk that he had possessed that morning. I could not tell what he was writing upon it. Now that a mage has appeared, I fear there are even greater figures lurking in the shadows. As for that medicinal powder, be honest, give me my share. Lean Wolf turned around, retrieved a white vial from a container, and placed it upon the desk. The elder nodded, and at long last he raised his head to look at the people gathered in the tent. When his gaze fell upon me, a flicker of genuine surprise appeared in his eyes. So you have returned? I am surprised you managed to make it back alive. The thin wolf remained silent. The old man with the goat-like beard turned his gaze toward Shen Yao. Is it you? Is it you who has been seeking him out every single day? Shen Yao said nothing, but my brow twitched involuntarily. The old man with the goat-like beard seemed to view me as some sort of paramour and was about to speak, when the thin wolf interjected. He is quite capable. We shall take him with us next time. He has interesting ideas. The old man with the goat-like beard nodded, then turned his gaze back to me. This time his eyes held 3 parts scrutiny and 7 parts curiosity. Since that is the case, what is it that you desire? Oh, I pointed myself. Are you speaking to me? The old man with the goat-like beard nodded. Yes, what do you want? I answered instinctively, I do not want anything. Impossible. Everyone here possesses something they covet. Some seek vindication, some desire freedom, some yearn for peace, and others wish to claim the lives of their enemies. What is it that you want? I understood. The old man with the goat-like beard was speaking the truth. I fell into a moment of silence before replying I wish to kill. Beyond that, I desire nothing else. The old man with the goat-like beard stared at me for a long time before chuckling, indeed. I had thought you wanted Princess Qingfeng. My expression darkened. It seemed this old man was well aware of my background. The old man with the goat-like beard then produced a ledger from beneath the table, opened it to a page, and looked up, asking, Whose name do you intend to write? I did not need to think. Shuka. Shuhei? K as in foolish or knave. The old man with the goat-like beard took his brush and inscribed the 3 characters Shuke onto the paper before saying, From this moment on, you must accumulate 1,000 merit points. Once you have accumulated, I subconsciously asked, What does this have to do with your previous question? The lecherous old man chuckled, saying it had nothing to do with it at all. I was merely curious. I was helpless. I had truly thought the previous matter was of great importance, yet it turned out to be nothing more than a joke by the lecherous old man. At this moment, the lecherous old man had already put away his book. Wolf bowed respectfully toward him before walking out of the tent. The others followed suit. I cast a profound look at the lecherous old man before stepping out of the tent. Understood.